Hi, everyone. Welcome to the For Animals for Earth podcast slash video cast. I am seriously working on what we're called now because it's a podcast, right? But it's been a video cast for, oh my gosh, like a long time now. Looks like we are streaming to YouTube, but we're having trouble streaming to Facebook. Let me read this really quickly.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Well, um, yeah. Okay. Well, if you're joining us from Facebook and it's working, hi. If you're joining us from YouTube, hi. So I'm Brandy. I'm the founder of For Animals for Earth, and I'm joined today by Lindsey Biondos, who is starting a brand new, slow, sustainable fashion line called the Violet Revolt. Hi, Lindsey.
Hi, Brandy. It's so great to be here, and I'm really excited to chat with you today. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm really excited too. Lindsey and I met, what was it? Probably about 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And we were bonding over our love for helping animals and our
Yeah.
love for fashion and unique fashion and fashion that is really doing good in the world and moving away from fast fashion. And I am just so excited about the project that you have going on and learning more about it. So the Violet Revolt is, like I said, it's a slow fashion line. It's a sustainable fashion line. You're using natural, certified organic plant fabrics.
Hmm.
You're sewing stuff on your own, and
Yeah.
you're donating to wildlife conservation. So
Yeah.
I wonder, can you start? I think the aesthetic is very unique for what you're doing. So can you start by kind of describing to us what the aesthetic of the clothes is that you're making?
Definitely. So, yeah, to your point, I think that I definitely do have an interesting aesthetic. I think I always was interested in sort of like different looking clothing growing up. I think the biggest thing is that the pieces that I make, I really like to focus on the details. So, I guess for me, I love to accessorize and kind of have like, interesting components that are unique and you can't really find everywhere else. So I think like that's really the biggest thing for me is that I wanted to create, wearable art, something that you can't find anywhere, and that really, demonstrates craftsmanship and quality, and something that you can cherish and hopefully hold on to for a really long time.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, for anyone who is listening, if you want to go see the clothing for yourself, I think that's probably the easiest way to see what we're talking about. So you can find it at the Violet Revolt on Instagram or Facebook. As you talk about these details, I know one of the things that you and I have talked about is that you're looking to use as many sustainable kind of details and accessories to the clothing as you can. I know a lot of
Hmm.
it you're making actually from the fabric. Can you
Right.
describe that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So that was actually kind of one of the biggest things for me is that while the clothing that I create is, I would say, like very unique and different, I also wanted to make the input process as simple as possible so that I wasn't garnering a lot of different ingredients from places all across the world and increasing my carbon footprint, trying to kind of streamline what I was making and make it as simple to make as possible was really key. So all of the fabrics that are used are organic plant fabrics. So fabrics that are made from natural materials. So nothing synthetic, nothing poly based. And while there's some things that are still being worked on in the fashion world in terms of what can actually be a purely plant-based notion, as they're called, so that's things like thread or buttons or things like that. That's a really big area of growth in the fashion industry. So those things are kind of hard to come by in terms of them being purely plant-based. So I try to find as much recycled thread as I can, recycled notions from that respect. However, the fabrics that I do make my clothing from are all organic, all plant-based, and all naturally dyed as well. So yeah, I definitely recognize the the thread area and potentially elastic as well as areas that I need to grow in and find better alternatives. But those are definitely areas that the market is moving towards, and hopefully we'll have a better option soon. But for now, I think the real focus for me has been on the fabric piece of it. Yeah.
I think that's really, really cool because having plant-based clothing, I think it sounds still pretty unique to me. You know what I mean? I know that the fashion industry is moving towards a much more natural, much more sustainable kind of way of being, but I love the idea of plant-based, and I love that a lot of what you do in the design of the things that you're making, you're actually able to do with the fabric. I think that's
Right.
really, really cool.
Hmm.
As you talk about fabric, I wonder if you'll talk a little bit about like what is a natural fabric. So for
Hmm.
people who are listening who haven't really dug into yet, like what does all this fabric stuff mean? I know
Hmm.
you've done a ton of research on
Definitely.
it, and I
Yeah.
wonder if you'll share in your minds like what is a good natural fabric to be using, and then what are you using for your clothes?
Definitely. Yeah. And that was honestly, this brand has been a long time in the making, and kind of defining that as well was a really big piece of, the length of time that it took. But definitely. So plant fabrics can come from a variety of different sources, but inherently they're fabrics that are created from natural materials. So they're not using any type of um, synthetic, inputs to create the material, because there are some fabrics out there that are kind of a blend of organic plant material and then also, something that is potentially petroleum based. So natural fibers can be things like linen, hemp fabric, cotton. There's also even things like viscose and rayon. However, the sustainability kind of range for each of those definitely varies, depending on where you get them from, and if whether or not that material is organic. So for me, I was really focused on, first of all, finding the type of fabric that I really wanted to create my clothing from. I think like one of the challenges with plant-based fabric is that a lot of the times, especially as it relates to linen, which comes from a flax seed, it's very kind of heavy and almost rough. It kind of depends on the preference of the wearer, but I really enjoy soft clothing and very movable clothing. And so for me, finding that kind of perfect fit was a bit challenging. And so what I ended up going with, especially for this first collection that I'll be releasing, is certified organic cotton. And it's 100% cotton, but it's like a very movable cotton. Whereas, like I said, with linen, potentially it's kind of more stiff. It wrinkles very easily, like those types of things. And then, looking at things like hemp and viscose and rayon, hemp is actually a really, really sustainable material. And that's what initially I was looking at making my clothes from. However, it's a very new thing in the industry, so there aren't a lot of good hemp suppliers out there. However, one really huge benefit is that with hemp, you don't need to use any pesticides. So inherently, most hemp should be organic already, which is awesome. And then one of the other challenges with things like viscose and rayon, which can come from bamboo and other cellulose fibers, is that bamboo fabrics, while bamboo is a very, very easily renewable resource, it takes a lot of processing to actually turn the plant into fabric, which is why I've tried to steer away from that. I admire brands that have utilized that as, an alternative to things like petroleum-based fabrics. However, it's not exactly like the most sustainable option. So in short, there's a lot of different factors that contribute to, what makes up a sustainable fabric. But in my instance, for my first collection, I'm using GOTS certified organic cotton. So
Awesome. Awesome. I'll take a quick moment to say hi to Tyler. Hi, Tyler. Thanks for joining us. She just commented. So I know that, okay, so you're describing finding these fabrics, and I know from my own experience in trying to find sustainable fabrics, that
Hmm.
that's not an easy process.
Right.
And I think you even alluded to the fact that this has been a long time in the making.
Definitely.
Can you tell us a bit about the story of it? So tell us the background of where the idea started and how you got to where you are now, and then tell us about your launch.
Definitely. Yeah. So, as I said earlier, this has definitely been a long time in the making. So, actually, it kind of started out back in my college days. So, I had gone to school and gotten a degree in marketing and was finishing up my senior year. And, I was kind of feeling like I am not passionate about, what I'm doing right now. And was just kind of looking for additional kind of creative outlets that I could potentially kind of dive into. And so through Instagram, actually, I got somehow hooked into the handmade fashion and handcrafted, jewelry, apparel, anything like that movement. And, nestled within that is the organic, plant based, and then also like natural dyeing movement. So I found about all of that back in 2018. And I had never heard of that before. I didn't even know you could dye things naturally. I didn't know that you could, find clothing that was made from hemp or bamboo. That was so new even then. And so I took an interest in that and, got out my grandma's sewing machine from the 70s that she gave me and started kind of playing around with, some of these fabrics that I had ordered online. And again, back in those days, people weren't necessarily certified organic. So, um, there was a lot of different elements there, but took that fabric, started kind of dyeing it naturally, took a natural dyeing in my college apartment and was dyeing it in my bathtub and my kitchen sink and all of that. So that's kind of where I got, accustomed to this whole movement. And, at the time I was very new and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with that skill set. And so, since then, I've really taken the time to look heavily and do a lot of digging into, what did I want to do with this brand and, who did I really want to be sourcing my materials from and what really mattered. And, what is the most sustainable way that I can make a clothing brand that's handmade. And so, in doing all of those things, I've kind of gotten to this place now where I've secured my supplier, which honestly was one of the most challenging things for sure. Finding someone who, understood what it means to be a small designer and not, trying to order 500 meters of fabric for this micro collection that I wanted to make. And, in conjunction with that, they had the specific fabric type that I was looking for. And also, we're very keen on sustainability and they were certified and they weren't being ambiguous about where they got like the cotton plant from that they use in all of their fabrics. So that whole piece, took about 2 years to finally find a supplier that I felt like I could trust. I definitely had experiences with suppliers where they would be very, I guess call it shady with where they were growing their products and they wouldn't really, give me the full details of the origin of anything. And so I decided to not go with those suppliers and really stick at it and try to do it right, as opposed to just doing it to get my product out there. And so, yeah, so now I'm at this place where I have my supplier and, now I'm just really working on trying to get my final pieces done. As you mentioned earlier, I make everything by hand. So that's been a big piece of it. And then also another component is that I've been working with um, a social enterprise located in Kenya that essentially employs women in northern Kenya to do beading for various suppliers. They do pieces, I believe they've done a piece for like Beyonce and like all these different things. And so I've been working very closely with them to create beading designs that I can then put onto my clothing. And so actually I just received the final pieces in the mail the other day, which I'm super excited about. And so yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at now, is really crafting and finalizing the pieces. And hopefully we'll be releasing in the next couple of weeks, but really have been trying to take my time and do it right and put pieces out there that I'm proud of and hopefully other people will enjoy too.
I love that you have taken your time. I think that that's probably not necessarily the norm, and
Hmm.
especially for how hard it is.
Right.
I was thinking about how much has changed. As you were talking, I was remembering myself like walking around these huge like trade show floors and going from supplier to supplier and asking, for the backstory, asking for transparency. And it was just like
Hmm.
there was it hit a point pretty quickly where they didn't even know the answers.
Right.
It was just, and I think that's just the way that the fashion industry has been, and
Agreed.
luckily it's changing. But I do think probably being a young designer in the space, it's it really probably takes a strong what's the word, values driven grounding, I guess, to say I'm not going to sacrifice on this. I'm just going to keep looking until I find somebody. And the good news is there are somebodies out there, right?
Hmm.
There are
Right.
people. You just have to keep looking. And like you said, like the notions are the next piece, but that
Right.
is changing too, right? So
Right.
yeah, I think it's really exciting that you've done that. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about natural dyeing, because
Uh-huh.
that's something that I am very interested in and haven't quite like taken the time to learn yet. But I would
Hmm.
love to take some of my older clothes and
Hmm.
dye them and make something new out of them. Same thing with the
Definitely.
kids' clothes, like as
Hmm.
they get stains. There was I cannot remember off the top of my head which episode. I want to say episode 19, but there were two women on here that have a kids costume line that is an eco-friendly kids costume line, and Katie Miles and Rachel Jones are their name, and they gave me this idea of throwing all of the kids clothes into a bucket every time they have a stain on them or they're sick of them or whatever. And then Katie, like every couple of months, she'll take them and dye them all with the kids. And then they have like brand new clothing and they're all excited. And
So
so
cool.
since then, that was a while back. Since then, I've been trying, like, I've got it on my bucket list to do that. So, anyway, that is a really long explanation for my question of tell me more about the natural dyeing. Like, how does that actually work?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's awesome. I think that's a great idea to dye kids' clothing that has stains in them. I love that. Gonna make a note of that. Um, but yeah, so natural dyeing, it can come in a lot of different forms. So I guess traditionally, clothing is dyed with synthetic colors that are produced in a lab. Utilize tons and tons of water as the fabric and the fiber is infusing with these synthetic colors. And within that is a lot of chemicals as well. So naturally, you can imagine that you have these synthetic fibers, you have these synthetic colors, and they're fusing together. And a lot of that water that is being used to process those fabrics is then being run off into our ocean. So there's a lot of like chemical reasons why synthetic dyeing is very detrimental, not to mention like the water usage that comes along with that. But then looking at natural dyeing, so really, this is how we used to dye as a species, like before the invent of synthetic dyes and, synthetic materials. We used to use, colors that come straight from the earth. So if you think about indigo, we know that's like a really, deep turquoise that is used to dye jeans a lot. And then there's, other things that you can even use, in your backyard, in your kitchen to dye your clothes. So a really good example is that, avocados, this huge big craze of everybody loving avocados. Well, the avocado skin can actually be used, as a scrap to dye clothing, and it creates a really nice muted, rosy pink color. So it's like also thinking about the, no waste aspect of, you could either use the avocado skins to dye your clothing, or you could just throw them away, but why not make another use of them? So that's kind of the approach that I'm trying to take. Actually, for my first collection, initially I was looking at having my natural dyeing outsourced. So the fabrics that I do have were naturally dyed by my supplier in India, which is where really a lot of the natural dyeing movement originated. However, for future collections, I'm actually looking at bringing that in-house and kind of bringing back the creativity and the fun aspect that I originally fell in love with making and dyeing clothing. So that's kind of what's in the pipeline. But yeah, you can really take a lot of different things. You can go foraging in your backyard, in the woods near your house, and find plants that can make colors that you would have never thought of. I think one of the coolest things about dyeing naturally is that, you know, while the colors may not be as dark as your synthetically dyed clothing, you'll find in a strange way that colors that are natural or pieces that are naturally dyed somehow mesh together and fit together well in a way that you just don't get with synthetically dyed clothing. They just, you know, you could have an avocado skin top with some type of indigo dyed, you know, blue bottoms. And for whatever reason, those colors wouldn't normally fit together with synthetic clothing, but they work together with natural dyeing. So it's just kind of cool that I think going back to kind of the origin of how did we dye clothes in the beginning can actually lead to a more simpler life when you find that if you have a lot of clothes that are dyed naturally, they'll just strangely all work together well and you can have a smaller wardrobe. So a lot of different benefits. But in short, that's kind of a summary of how natural dyeing is in the world today and kind of what I'm looking to do with it with my brand.
Wow, that's really cool. That actually, it's funny because when you say it, you think, well, yeah, of course, because like everything that is on the earth and of the earth works
Mm-hmm.
together well, right? When it's
Right.
when it's in harmony. And that's such a cool like finding, I feel like that you've had by working with natural dyes. And I would imagine it probably also goes to say like they just probably look better as well, just
Mm-hmm.
on us as human beings, right? Because we are a part of the earth as well. So that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
How so do you add like a vinegar to it, or how do you make a dye solution with the natural elements?
Definitely. So this is actually where kind of like the craft comes into play, because each different natural dyeing element responds with different call it additives and mordants. So basically, there's a few stages, and I myself am not an experienced natural dyer, so I'm by no means an expert, but you do have to. It's like a series of boiling the material that you're going to be dyeing, infusing that with the fabric, but also adding kind of what would be considered a binding agent. So in the natural dyeing world, that's a mordant. And what mordant you use can really depends, like I said, on the dyeing material that you choose. There are, more sustainable ways to do that and less sustainable ways. I actually am most familiar with the way that I'm trying to not do, which is using heavy metals. So that's one thing that I'm trying to be really cognizant of when I'm looking at natural dyeing is that one thing that does adhere natural dyes to fibers is alum. And when you think about that from, dyeing in your backyard perspective, you don't want that heavy metal to be just going back into the watershed ecosystem. So one actually alternative that I just heard of the other day was soy milk is actually a really good mordant. And so basically what the mordant does is it enables the fibers to bind with the natural material so that it sticks and the color has more longevity over time. And so, yeah, in short, it's hard to say because it really depends on the fabric that you're dyeing as well. So naturally, cotton, hemp, linen, all those different plant fibers bind more easily with natural materials, that the color just stays longer when you do it that way. But it really depends what works best, really depends on the material that you choose in conjunction with the natural dyeing material that you choose as well. So
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, oh, that's so cool. I really need to like just be like Somebody hold me accountable. Okay. Hold me accountable, Lindsey, for
I
actually
will.
trying this. Give me by the end of the summer. I'm going to actually try to dye my kids' clothes.
Mhm.
And my own too. But yeah, so let's talk just a teensy bit more about the actual clothing line. So you're hoping for
Mhm.
it to come out in a couple of weeks. I love that you are not saying like it's coming out by this specific date because you're letting it come out on I mean, for lack of a better explanation, God's time, or the
Mhm.
universe's time. You're letting it come
Right.
out when it's meant to come out. And I absolutely love that. Do you have is there one favorite piece that's near and dear to your heart, or is every single piece like near and dear to your heart? Or are you sick of any of them by this point because you've been making them for so long, which I completely know from my own experience. By the time something is actually out, I'm so over it.
No, I totally feel it. That's so funny. I mean, it's hard because I will say there are pieces that so one of the pieces that I'll be including was like a mirror or an emulation of a piece that I made that was one of my first pieces. So it's kind of like my namesake, and I remember this to be the piece that started it all. So I definitely have a piece. It's a skirt that I personally love. I still wear the sample that I made back in 2018 to this day. So I think that one's definitely a favorite for me. I think that in terms of new pieces, there is like one top in particular that I'm really keen on. But I think one of the cool things about, being able to make everything by hand is I am going to make every piece unique. So the beading placement that, from the beading components that I'm getting from Kenya, they're not going to be all in the same places on every single piece. So really every piece is going to be unique. And I'll also be including other really cool elements that are, yeah, it's just going to, every piece is going to be unique. And I think that's one of the coolest things. So that if you do purchase, like you are not going to be wearing the same shirt as anyone else. They're all going to be different. So I think that's like, for me, the coolest piece is the artistic and the creative component.
That is really, really cool. And I think just also, I was thinking, if you purchase a piece, I was just imagining wearing it, and you can think all the way back to like, this was dyed by the earth. This
Hmm.
was, grown by the earth. This was
Hmm.
created by people who genuinely loved making it and creating it. And it's got so much love in it all the way
Definitely.
until it ends up on your body. And I just think that that's such a cool, I think sometimes we underestimate the energy that comes in our clothing,
Hmm.
or could come in our clothing if it's very consciously produced and worn. So I think that's really, really cool. Tell us quickly how to best find you. So if someone wants to get in touch with you personally, what's the best way? And then how can they find Violet Revolt?
Yeah, definitely. So if anybody ever wants to reach out, you can just shoot me an email at lindsey@violetrevolt.com. That's my personal email. But really, I think I'm most active on Instagram. That's just, I think, the best outlet for me. So I'm always on there. You can always shoot me a DM. I think one thing that I really try to do is educate as well. So even if, you're not in the market for purchasing a piece, I try to really make my Instagram page and Facebook page about educating people about what is natural dyeing, what can we use, what are different sustainability components that we can think about. So but yeah, I'm always available for questions or just to chat. I love connecting with people that care about sustainability or fashion or, veganism, all of those different cool topics.
Yes, that's awesome. And a reminder, it's at the Violet Revolt on
Yeah.
Instagram and on Facebook.
Yes.
And so, last question I love to ask everyone who comes on the show this. What is one simple idea that anyone listening could try in their daily life today to make a difference for animals and the environment?
Yeah, definitely. So this, I think for me has been a challenge too. So I will preface with I used to be a big purchaser of fast fashion back in the day. I loved, having cool new designs and cool new things. But I think what I've realized like over the past few years after looking into this is that it's so much more um meaningful to have pieces of clothing that you know where they or originate from, and you know who made it, and yeah, what kind of energy the clothing that you're wearing, comes from. And so I think the biggest thing for me is that I've really been trying to focus on, understanding where I'm putting my dollars, but also, if that means that I need to be saving up to purchase something that I know that I will wear and cherish and, not just donate in a year, to me, that's more meaningful than having, 10 new pieces of clothing or, household items or whatever. So, in short, I think the biggest thing for me is really focusing on the intent and the quality of what you're buying. And I think that in the long run, you'll find it more rewarding, even though I hate saying that with buying things in general, but you'll find it more rewarding to have things that you, worked hard to purchase, or that kind of where they come from. So I think that's like the biggest thing, or the main takeaway that I would say.
I love that idea of saving up for something and, choosing one something and saving up for it, because then when you actually get it, there is so much more excitement and energy around it. It reminds me of like
Mm-hmm.
being, a young teenager, or like my daughter's
Right.
age, she's starting to save her money to try to buy something. And just that idea of really, really working towards like this one thing that I'm just really going to love and cherish. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot that we can't really explain that goes into that energy that we feed into our lives every day, right? So yeah, I love that idea. So thank you so much for coming on and joining me. And thank you to everybody who's joined us today, watching and watching today, whoever's listening in the future. And I just want to say that I am so excited for your clothing line to come out. I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to see where it goes. And I can't wait for people to be wearing it all around the world and feeling that connection to the earth that you do. So I think it's really exciting. And thank you again for being on here. And goodbye to everyone who's watching as well. So bye,
Thanks so
Lindsey.
much,
Bye, everyone.
Brandy. Bye.
Bye.